All right, so I'm gonna do a response. Hopefully, it's gonna be a little quicker than my usual responses here, just to Adam's last video. So Adam posted this video where he gave, uh, I guess what I would call it is his mechanism of salvation. So how he views the process of salvation. But I'm actually not gonna disagree with the mechanism. I don't have a problem necessarily with what he's saying, even though I might change some things around or say them slightly differently. But the point of him sharing this mechanism is to argue for the end result because we're talking about sinlessness and perfection and all this stuff. And what I would say is that the mechanism he's presenting will produce a holy character, will produce a person that is very much Christ-like, but still that would not qualify as true perfection. Because, like I said in previous videos, true perfection is defined by the character of Christ. Now, again, when I say this, I'm not arguing that true perfection is not possible, that nobody could ever get there. All I'm saying is that when somebody follows Adam's mechanism, exactly how he described it, or maybe even better than he described it, and does everything perfectly, the end result of that will very likely not be equal to uh, what constitutes true perfection. And I think one of the ways LGBT supporters often trip themselves up is by thinking like this, by thinking, okay, let's define sin. Sin is a transgression of the law, all this stuff. Once we define sin, that gives us a definition of sinlessness, and sinlessness is the same thing as perfection. But what I would argue is no, it's not the same thing. Perfection is defined by the life of Christ. And how is that different? Well, it's different because it's an ongoing thing. So a person could be sinless for 6 months and then fall once, and they're not perfect anymore. While Jesus' perfection was ongoing. So from some moment, true perfection means that from some point in time, that person doesn't make any mistakes in terms of like ever losing their temper once, ever doing anything. And again, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that for the 99% of people that experience this true uh, mechanism that Adam is describing, that is not the end result of their lives. They're continuing to have some limitations, or they're not quite there where the perfection of Christ was. And going even a bit further, the key characteristics. So I would say there's two main things. One is the occasional unexpected falls. So losing your temper, uh, being prideful about something that you weren't expecting, whatever it is. There's things that we consciously choose to do and things that we sometimes fall into without realizing it. Those are the kind of things that if they happen, they differentiate somebody from the kind of life Christ lived, where he couldn't do those things and still remain God's perfect sacrifice. So those things can continue to exist in the life of even somebody who experiences the mechanism that Adam described of overcoming sin. But even more important than that is the idea of character. And this is something that I don't think Adam quite understands yet. And this is what I talk about when I talk about dualism. I've been I spend quite a bit of time, and I don't think people quite get what I'm saying. Uh, Evangelical and Catholic theology is built on this idea of a dualistic anthropology. What does that mean? It means that they believe human beings are built of two parts. There's the material part, the flesh and bones, everything that we're built of, and then there's this soul, some immaterial part, and that's what's affected by sin. But because Adventists don't have that, we have to develop a whole different view of thinking about human nature. So Adam says things like, sin is a state. Well, yeah, sin affects us in the sense that we're weak, we have predispositions in our body. We have various kinds of things that predispose us to sin. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is character, and character is something different. What character is not just what you're willfully doing now and choosing to do or not to do now. Character is what you would do under any other circumstances. So, for example, we have the life of Jesus for the first 30 years of his life. And I'm sure it wasn't an easy life. I'm sure Satan was constantly on his back, constantly tempting him. Um, you know, whatever he did all day, he got up, he maybe went, attended some kind of events with his family and friends. He had to work, he had to do all this stuff. And Satan was tempting him, and he had to face temptation, but he had a relatively simple life in contrast with an event that happened immediately after he started his ministry, which is the temptations in the wilderness. Because what happened there is God brought him to the very edge of his human nature. I mean, it says that after the 40 days after he was tempted, the angels came and ministered to him. It's quite likely that if they hadn't, he would have been dead. In other words, he starved so much that he would not have lived another hour or another day or whatever. Obviously, I can't prove that that's the case, but it seems that's what might have happened. So he was brought to the very edge of his nature and still didn't fall. So what does that tell us? It tells us that Jesus wasn't just sinless in the sense that when he was living in Nazareth and doing his daily business, he wasn't committing sin. He had a sinless character in the sense that even under once he was taken to a whole different set of circumstances that were 10,000 times harder, he still didn't sin. Okay? So sinlessness is not just you not committing any sin at this moment in time under your current life circumstances, but it's the fact that you're not even going to commit sin when put in a set of circumstances that are 10,000 times harder. That's what character perfection is. That's where Jesus' character is at. And we have no guarantee, or there's no reason to think that every single person that experiences this mechanism that Adam is talking about, which is a powerful thing, this idea that God comes in and gives us victory over sin, all the stuff that Adam spent a whole hour and a half describing to us, assuming we take everything exactly as he said, that's going to produce a very powerful change in the life. But that change does not equate Jesus level perfection. It doesn't necessarily equate that. It could. I'm not saying it's impossible. And a big reason why I don't say impossible, because that just creates a whole other debate that we don't need to get into. Let's allow for that possibility. Hey, maybe for some people, maybe some people do get there, but it doesn't mean it's for everybody. And how do we know this? Well, we know this because of the whole Bible. There's an entire Bible of people of character, people that have walked with God, people that have done all kinds of great things, and yet they're not there. And then we have our own experience in the sense that I've said it time and again. I've met hundreds of people that are very mature in Christ, but they're not there. And another way to think about it is that let's just assume maybe there's a message that people didn't understand. There's a ton of people that have gone around and preached messages that are very similar to what Adam was saying. And the idea is that if in fact this thing is about a lack of understanding, what we should be able to see is a movement of people that are listening to these messages as somebody's going around and preaching to everybody about how to gain victory. And everybody's hearing the message and they're buying into it. And there's a whole transformation going on. And now we have a whole group of people that are living at that Jesus level perfection. But again, that's not something we haven't seen. So there's no reason to think that this mechanism that is being described here produces necessarily that kind of perfection. And again, I'm not saying it's something that it can't eventually produce or it cannot produce for some people, but there's no evidence that it's something that it will produce for everybody, or that it will necessarily produce it at the end of time. So what we have here is actually kind of a reverse logic. We have this necessity in the LGBT crowd to find a way to explain this end-time perfection. And because there's this sort of weight on their shoulders to explain the end-time perfection, then they have to come to all this gospel elements to argue or to develop a way to argue to explain how this thing could be possible or how it's going to happen and so on. In other words, there's a theological push coming from the requirement or the sense of necessity for some kind of anti-perfection that affects their understanding of the gospel. But if we start our study of the gospel with the Bible, we leave the whole anti-perfection aside and we just look at what the Bible says in terms of what we can expect. The Bible doesn't push things to that level. It tells us, yes, there's going to be victory, there's going to be great victories, there's going to be transformations, but we have no evidence that the end result is going to be the exact same thing that we see in the life of Jesus. So the real debate then is, do we really need this perfection thing at the end? And I think in order to be able to even tackle that, there's a whole lot of other stuff we need to discuss in kind of like as a prerequisite to even get to that conversation. And the big question is why that's even needed. So in other words, we need to discuss issues like how we build our theology and how we balance the Bible and Ellen White. And that's that's one of the biggest problems we have in LGBT circles. Once we deal with that, we need to logically think through what the Bible is doing, what exactly is God trying to do, why we're here, what is the point of this great controversy, how is he establishing the things that he's trying to establish, and what exactly is he trying to do as we approach the end of time, so that we could determine why any of these things are needed, if at all, and what exactly is God going to do at the end. And then once we solve that, maybe we will come back to the gospel and figure out exactly what the plan of salvation is trying to accomplish. Because otherwise, we can create a very difficult life experience for a lot of people. Because, for example, Adam put out this video where he gave his interpretation of the mechanism of the gospel, right? And the idea of it all is that once you put this in and apply it, what you're going to end up with is Christ-like level victory, okay? So let's say a bunch of people listen to his video and buy into it and they apply it, but they don't get there. What they're going to feel is that, they're not doing it right, they're not good enough, they lack faith, something. It's going to be a source of discouragement, when in fact, there's no reason for that discouragement because God accepts them as they are. As long as they're sincerely following him and surrendering to him each day, their occasional missteps are not going to affect where they are with God. But if the idea is that once you put this mechanism in place, the end result is this victory, perfect victory that we're talking about, then that's just going to be an unnecessary source of discouragement. So anyway, that's another major problem with approaching things this way. So I'm just going to leave it at this. My main concern with this is that, yes, I'm okay with the mechanism. I'm not going to debate that. I'm not going to say, hey, there's something wrong with how Adam described his process and so on. But it's the end result. It's the expectation of what's going to happen here as a result of applying this mechanism. That's the thing. I think it's being stretched further than it can be stretched with the evidence we have. So it's probably going to be easier to just discuss this in person in future videos. That's why I'm just going to keep this here and not do my usual PowerPoint slides and so on. Right. So we'll talk in the next video, hopefully.